I want to talk about how to write JavaScript, but with one little difference. No letters or numbers allowed. If you take this block of code, plug it into Firefox, you will get an alert box. This is completely legit JavaScript right here.
Obfuscated JavaScript? Is that what we're learning?
This is very obfuscated. So the question might come up, why? Well, it actually came up from a real-life scenario where you had a filter that was blocking alphanumeric characters but not symbols. It can defeat some of the different, sanitized script versions. I know it's been used to break Facebooks. May not be as easily detected. It's kind of a think outside the box exercise, and of course that comes to the real answer, because we can. So, just a little history. This began on Slackers. There's several threads there about it. OWASP did a contest last year. That's how I started learning this, where that's actually that first block of code was you had a shortest block of code, no non-alphanumeric to alert the word OWASP. There's a whole forum on Slackers now on obfuscation. There's several threads there, and I'll have links to the end. This is not my doing. Like, what you're seeing is I have learned this from the masters. These guys here have done a lot of development on this, and I completely yield to their expertise in all these. Lever1 in particular just has a way of optimizing everything that I come up with. So, basic ideas behind this. First of all, variable names don't have to be letters to start with in JavaScript. You can pick Unicode symbols. You can do, underline or, of course, the little jQuery $sign there, so that's helpful. A key aspect of JavaScript is the dynamic weak typing, and you can type convert till the day is long. It's very flexible with the primitive type, so if you just take some variable and plug it into a situation where it's a different data type, JavaScript will do everything it can to just convert it to the new data type and keep going. So you can see here, all it takes is just put a plus mark in front of that string there, you get a number back, put a not operator on the 0, and you get a Boolean out of it. So that's something that comes in very handy. This is just a little trick to be aware of. If you start combining arrays or objects, those end up concatenating. That can be an easy way to get certain strings sometimes. And this is another very key aspect of it. If you have a string in JavaScript, you can treat it like an array to pull off individual letters. So here the 0th character is T, first character is E, and then of course you can recombine all of those letters using concatenation to get a new string out of it. So if you have one string to start with, you can build other strings using the individual letters. So with objects and with methods and properties also of objects, typically you see the dot notation, window.alert when you're doing JavaScript, but you can also treat them like arrays also and access the objects that way by calling them as a string. And so that becomes very important later on. So this is just kind of a reference slide, an example of some of the different type conversions that happen. And you can see right away some of these, like the not empty string is true, no letters or numbers there, plus brackets plus array is 0. So there's some ways you can get some basic values just by using some of these empty primitive types. So to start off with, let's try to get some numbers. So an easy way to do that is starting with an array or a string gives you a 0. And then we can assign that to a variable if we want. I just chose the degree symbol here. And then you have all the different operators at your disposal. So you can do increment before, increment after, you can do division, you can negate it, you can also do decrement operators. JavaScript has a weird little tilde which adds 1 and makes it negative, and multiplication. So you can see starting with the 0 here, we can use all these operators to basically get any number we want. If we just keep adding to it or moving things around, you can even concatenate together to get some of the larger numbers more easily. So the next step would be to get strings. So one way I like to start is just with an empty string. If you're concerned about quote marks, there are other ways to get strings. You don't have to start with this one, as you'll see in a second. So here we take the, change that to a Boolean, take the not, we get a true, add a blank object to it. Since we concatenate them, JavaScript changes it all to a string, and we get this true object. So now all of a sudden we have some letters at our disposal that we can pull off this string. We haven't used any letters so far, but we can pull them off using that array notation. If we take the Boolean of that and then add a string to it, we'll get the word false. If we just took the Boolean, then JavaScript's not going to treat it like a string when we're trying to pull letters off of it, so we actually have to concatenate another string to it just to make sure we get the right data type. Then we'll go ahead and establish our starting number here. And so now we can start pulling off letters. From our first string, if we pull off the 0th one, we get a T. These are actually Unicode symbols. You can see little marks on top. Next character over is an R. We can pull off an S off of our false. This again, we've got 1 increment by 2, so that's the 3rd one. And then do another one to get 5, and we can pull an O off. And so just from these letters right here, you can see that we've now spelled out the word sort. So if we were to apply that then to just a blank array, we would get a reference to the sort function. Now we're not actually calling the function yet. There's no parentheses here. We're not executing. It's just getting a reference to it. So it really doesn't matter what is in the array to start with. We're just getting the function from any old array. So in that first array, we can do all of our assignments to establish these values. Colors are just to make it a little more readable. So in our first array, we just do a whole list of all those statements that we just saw, stick in our string at the very end there, and now we have a reference to the sort function without ever using any letters or numbers. And of course, there's a lot of optimization you can do. This is just kind of an example where you can nest several of these declarations to shorten things up and make it go a lot quicker. So one thing to remember, though, we're building all these strings and stuff, but it said here, alert the string and alert in an array are not actually the alert function. So you can't just like use this to say alert and go to town. All we're doing here is we're getting words, we're getting strings. And so this is where that idea of the array notation, access properties, and methods becomes important. So the reason I chose sort as an example to start with is because in Firefox, if you get a reference to the sort function, call it on nothing, you actually get the window object back. So this is an example where using that code we just had, we can assign that to a variable, execute the function, and we'll have a window object which we can then access things like alert or other stuff.
Had you set X to just be the empty array, would it have also called the window function?
Like just X equals array?
Yeah.
You would have gotten an error because then X wouldn't be a function if you tried to call X parentheses. There's certain places where the window object kind of leaks out.
Gotcha.
I'm not exactly sure what the logic, like this is a Firefox only one, but sort is one of the quickest things you can get using these letters that you start with. So it's very easy to build just a short little bit of code in Firefox. One nice thing in Firefox for some of the contests and whatnot is you can actually use base 64, and usually if you're going back to letters, the characters you convert from are not alphanumeric, so it still works pretty well. Firefox actually has a neat little trick for assignment where if you assign an array to a string like this, then you just get each individual letter. So that can be a really quick way to pull off those letters rather than having to do the array notation for each one. Beginning back to all browsers, another way you can pull off window is by getting a reference to concat, calling it blank, and selecting the 0th element, you get window back. Another way is if you get a reference to value of, call it on a blank, you'll get window. There's a bunch of other ways to do this. There's a whole thread on Slackers of ways to get the window object, just in all different browsers. So there's definitely other ways of doing it. These are the concat one is usually the simplest if you're going cross-browser.
That works for Chrome too?
Yes, works for Chrome. So now that we have window, what next? Well, if we wanted to use eval, we would need to get a v in order to build a string to call that function. One way we could do that is if you just convert a function of one of the built-in functions to a string, it usually shows up as function, function name, native code. This is in basically every browser does this. So that's where we can pull our v off. Sometimes it might be in a different place depending on the browser, but it works. But getting some of the letters can be really difficult. To start with here, we only had basically 12 letters to work off of, but we can get others. If you get infinity, that'll give you an N. You can call the constructor on a regexp object, and you'll be able to get the P out of it from the name there. But again, remember, you're going to have to build this whole long string constructor, so it can take some code to do that. It would be nice if we could just like call string from char code, but if we're going to call this function, we already have to have H and we have to have C in order to get a reference to that function. And those are pretty hard, if not impossible, to come by. Some of these letters, I don't think anyone's found a way to get just from the basic primitive objects yet.